My name is Claire Whitfield, and I was 48 years old the day my husband tried to make me homeless on my own front porch. 40 minutes earlier, a lawyer had told me my grandmother left me $7 million and her house in Aspen. I drove home to tell Wade the good news. He was already standing on the steps. So was his mother. So was a stranger holding an envelope with my name on it. Marlene smiled at me the way you smile at a slow child. She said the house was sold, the divorce was filed, and I had until the weekend to pack. I set my purse down on the railing, and I smiled back. But here's what none of the three of them knew, and what made my mother-in-law stop smiling about an hour later. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where we tell quiet stories about women who stop asking for permission and start reading the fine print. If you have ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to protect you, stay with me all the way to the porch. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from, and be sure to subscribe, so the next story finds you when you need it. That morning started ordinary, which is how the worst ones always start. I made Wade his coffee, 2 sugars, the way I had for 27 years. I have been a probate paralegal in Marrow Creek for most of those years. People bring me the worst week of their lives: a death, a will, a house nobody can agree on, and I put it in order. That is the thing I am good at. Order. Wade used to call me the family thermostat because I kept everyone comfortable, and nobody ever thought to ask how I was doing. I paid the bills. I drove his mother to her doctors. I covered his sister's rent twice and never brought it up again. There was always a reason it had to be me. There was never a reason it could be someone else. My grandmother was the only person who ever told me to stop. "Keep something back for yourself, Claire," she would say. Every single visit. Like she was leaving me a key. She had died 6 weeks before all of this. 89 years old, in her sleep, with her reading glasses still on the nightstand. I missed her in the specific way you miss the one person who actually saw you. She raised me after my mother couldn't, in that same house with the wide front porch, and she taught me to read a contract before I signed my name to anything. I thought that was just how she talked. I did not understand yet how carefully she had been watching the people around me, or how long she had been getting ready. The reading was at the firm where I work, which felt strange, sitting on the client side of a desk I usually sit behind. Joan Pruitt handled it herself. Joan is 60, sharp as a tack, and she taught me most of what I know. She read the will slowly, the way she does when she wants you to hear every word. My grandmother left me everything. The house in Aspen she had owned for 40 years, a little under $7 million in accounts and land, all of it placed inside a trust, with my name on it and no one else's. I had known Nana had money. I had not known there was that much, because she lived in cardigans and drove a truck older than my marriage. Joan looked up at me over her glasses. "There's one more thing," she said. She slid a sealed envelope across the desk. My grandmother's handwriting was on the front, that careful slanted print I would know anywhere. "Open this when you are alone," it said. Not before. Joan told me Nana had given it to her 2 years ago, with instructions to hand it over only after the will was read. I turned it over in my hands. It was heavier than 1 page. I almost opened it right there. Something stopped me, maybe just the word alone, underlined twice. So I put it in my purse, thanked Joan, and walked out into the bright, cold afternoon, already rehearsing how I would tell Wade. I thought it was the best news of our lives. I could not wait to get home. It is 15 minutes from the office to our house, all of it along the river road, and I spent every one of them imagining Wade's face. We could finally fix the porch steps. We could pay off Tara's second mortgage for good instead of in pieces. We could breathe. Somewhere around the old grain silo, a smaller thought surfaced, the kind you keep pushing under. 3 weeks earlier, Wade had taken a call in the garage and shut the door. When I asked, he said it was a realtor, looking at a property for a friend. Wade does not have friends who buy property. The week after that, Marlene called me twice to ask, very casually, whether Nana had left a will and who her lawyer was. I told her it wasn't her business, gently, because I always said everything gently. Then there was Tara, who had not visited in a year, suddenly dropping by with banana bread and questions. I had noticed all of it. I am not a woman who misses things. The trouble is that noticing and believing your own husband would do something are two different rooms, and I had been standing in the doorway between them for weeks. I turned onto our street, and the doorway slammed shut. Marlene's gray sedan was parked in my spot. Tara's truck was behind it, and on the porch, 3 people were standing in a line like they were waiting for a bus, which is not what family does when it has good news to share. My foot came off the gas on its own. I told myself there was a normal reason for this. I have learned that the sentence "there is a normal reason for this" is almost always a lie you tell yourself right before you find out there isn't. I parked on the street and walked up the path I had walked 10,000 times. Wade would not look at me. He stood with his hands jammed in his pockets, staring at a spot on the floorboards like it owed him money. Marlene stood front and center, the way she always positions herself, chin up, coat buttoned, ready for an audience. Tara was half a step behind her, almost vibrating. The fourth man I did not know. He was the one who spoke first. "Claire Whitfield," he said. And when I said yes, he handed me a thick envelope and told me I had been served. A process server. On my own porch, in front of my neighbor Dot Hensley, who had stopped watering her geraniums to watch. Wade finally cleared his throat and said the word divorce, like it was a weather report. Then Marlene took over, because Marlene always takes over. She told me the marriage was finished. She told me they had already accepted an offer on the house, a good offer, cash, and that the new owners wanted to close fast. She said I should be reasonable and take the weekend to get my things. There was a smile on her face the entire time, the patient, pitying smile of a woman who believes she has already won. Then she delivered the line she had clearly been saving, slow and clear so Dot could hear it too. "The house is sold. You're homeless now." The water from Dot's hose ran into the street. Tara actually grinned. Wade studied the floor. And I stood there on the steps of the house my grandmother raised me in, holding divorce papers in one hand and the news of $7 million in the other, and I felt something settle in me that was not panic. It was the cold, clean feeling I get at work right before I find the exact clause that breaks a case wide open. I just needed to be sure first. So I smiled. I did not cry. I did not shout. I did not ask Wade how he could do this to me, though all of those things were sitting right there waiting to be used. I just smiled at the 3 of them like they had told me a joke that hadn't landed yet. It threw them. Marlene's smile flickered just for a second, the way a porch light flickers before it decides whether to stay on. Tara couldn't stand it. "What's so funny?" she snapped. I told her nothing was funny. I said I needed to read a few things before I responded, because I never sign anything I have not read, and I suggested they might want to do the same. Marlene said there was nothing to read. The lawyers had handled it. Everything was in order. I have spent 20 years listening to people tell me everything is in order. It almost never is. People who say it the loudest have usually read the least. I looked at Wade then, and for one moment he looked back, and I saw it plain on his face. He knew this was wrong. He had known the whole time. He had let his mother and his sister load the gun, and he had simply agreed to be in the room when it went off. That look told me more than the divorce papers did. I picked my purse up off the railing. I did not give them a single thing to push against, no tears to comfort, no anger to feed on. I just turned and walked back down my own steps, and I could feel 3 pairs of eyes on my back, confused that the slow child wasn't crying. Here is what 27 years buys you, in case you were wondering. It buys you a husband who lets his mother do his talking. It buys you a sister-in-law who eats your banana bread and helps plan your eviction. I added it up later, the way I add up everything. I had paid Marlene's roof repair in 2019, $11,000, never repaid, never mentioned. I had co-signed Tara's first business loan and quietly absorbed it when the business folded. I had spent 14 Christmases hosting a family that now wanted me gone by Sunday. And the most expensive thing I had spent was the part of myself that kept believing I was one of them if I just gave a little more. Standing on that street, with Dot Hensley pretending to water plants that were already drowning, the humiliation was real. I want to be honest about that. It is one thing to be left. It is another thing to be left on a stage your own family built, with a neighbor for an audience and a stranger for a witness. But underneath the humiliation, something my grandmother put in me a long time ago was already doing the math. They had a buyer. They had a closing date. They had a smile and a deadline, and they were very, very confident. People are only that confident when they have not checked their assumptions. I had one question sitting at the center of all of it, the question that would decide everything. Who, exactly, did they think owned this house? I got in my car. I did not drive away from my life. I drove toward the one place where their confidence couldn't follow me. I drove the 15 minutes back to the office. The firm was empty by then, just the hum of the copier and the smell of old coffee, and I sat down at my own desk in the quiet and let my hands stop shaking before I did anything else. There is a version of this story where I went back up those steps and screamed until my throat gave out. I understand that version. I have felt it. But I have spent 2 decades watching people lose everything because they fought their battles in the wrong room. They argue on porches and in parking lots and in text messages at 2 in the morning, and they think they are winning because they got the last word. The last word is worthless. I have watched men with the better case lose it entirely because they could not stop talking. I didn't argue on the steps. I never win on steps. I win on paper. So I made myself a cup of the bad office coffee and I opened a fresh legal pad, the same kind I use for clients, and at the top I wrote the date and one sentence. What do they think they are selling? Then I started building the file, the way I have built 100 files for strangers, except this time the client was me. I pulled up the county recorder's site. I found the firm's title software. I laid the divorce papers flat and read every line, slowly, the way Joan reads a will. And the whole time, in the back of my mind, my grandmother's sealed envelope sat in my purse like a stone I had not yet turned over. I would get to it. First, I needed to know what was true, and what was a story 3 desperate people had told themselves on my front porch. The first thing I did was put the timeline in order, because a timeline is where the truth hides. Nana died on a Tuesday in March. Wade's secret garage phone call was 9 days later. Marlene's first call asking about the will was the week after that. Tara's banana bread visit came 2 days before the divorce was actually filed. None of it was a coincidence, and all of it was a plan. I could see the shape of it now, the way you see a whole table once one piece slides into place. They had not decided to leave me. They had decided to leave me at a particular moment, the narrow window between my grandmother's death and the day her estate fully settled. They thought if they moved fast, filed fast, and sold the house out from under me fast, I would be too frightened and too homeless to fight for my share of what was coming. They were treating my inheritance like a clock that was ticking down, and they wanted to grab the house before it chimed. It was almost smart. It would have been smart, against a different woman, one who didn't know what a recorded deed was. What it actually was a group of people who had never once in their lives had to read the document they were standing on. They assumed the house was ours, mine and Wade's, the way you assume the floor will hold. I pulled my chair closer to the screen. Assumptions are the most expensive things people own. I was about to find out exactly how expensive this one was going to be for them. I found the listing in under a minute. Our house, my grandmother's house, with the wide porch and the crooked steps, photographed on a bright day 3 weeks ago while I was apparently at work believing I had a marriage. The listing was already marked under contract. I clicked through to the public records and felt my stomach drop and steady at the same time. There was a real buyer, a couple named Decker, from down in Glenwood, who had put down earnest money, $40,000, into escrow. There was a closing scheduled for the following Friday. And there, on the listing agreement and the seller's disclosures, was a signature I had seen on 27 years of birthday cards. Wade had signed as the owner of the property. He had signed seller where the seller's name goes, bold as anything. like a man signing for a car he was sure was his. He had shown the agent utility bills and a homeowner's policy in his name as the resident, told her he and his wife owned the place free and clear and that she had already moved out, and the agent, who happened to be a friend of Tara's, took him at his word. Nobody had pulled the actual title yet. That part comes later, in escrow, the week of closing, when the title company finally does the digging the rest of them never bothered to do. For a second, I just stared at it. This was not a threat anymore. Not a porch performance to scare me into signing. They had taken a stranger's money. They had promised that family a home. They had set a date. Whatever happened next, it was going to happen to real people with $40,000 in escrow and a moving truck already on hold. The cruelty of it was almost impressive. They had not just tried to push me out. They had sold the floor out from under 3 families at once, the Deckers and mine and, though they didn't know it yet, their own. I printed the listing. I printed the contract. I printed the escrow instructions. And then I did the one thing I should probably have done years ago, the thing my grandmother had told me to do in every conversation we ever had. I went to look at whose name was actually on the deed. I want to stop here and tell you about Marlene, because it matters, and because I have had a long time to understand her. It would be easy to call her a monster and move on. She is not a monster. She is something more ordinary and more dangerous, which is a frightened woman who decided a long time ago that the only safe thing in the world was control of a house. When Marlene was 31, her husband died and left her nothing but his debts, and the bank took the home she had raised Wade and Tara in. She stood on a curb with 2 kids and a suitcase and watched strangers carry out her furniture. She has told that story at every holiday for 40 years, and every time, the lesson is the same. Never let anyone take the roof. So when my grandmother died with money and an Aspen estate and a house in Marrow Creek that Marlene had always assumed was just Wade's house too, something old and panicked woke up in her. In her mind, she was not stealing. She was getting there first, the way she wished someone had gotten there first for her, back when it was her on that curb. She convinced herself the house was family property, that I was the outsider who had married in, and that a quick, clean sale was simply taking what they were owed before the rich relatives locked it all away. She believed it completely. That is the thing about Marlene. She never lies. She just decides what the truth should be, and then she stands very straight and dares the world to disagree. I was about to disagree with a piece of paper. The county keeps every deed ever recorded, scanned and searchable, and finding ours took me about 90 seconds. I pulled it up and read it twice, slow, the way you read something you already suspect, but need to see in black and white. The grantor was Vivian Whitfield. The grantee was Claire Whitfield. Only Claire Whitfield. Recorded 14 years ago, on a quitclaim deed. No other name anywhere on it. Not Wade's, not ours. Mine. My grandmother had signed her house over to me alone 14 years before any of this happened, and I had let it sit in the back of my memory like an old photo, because Nana still lived in that house, still paid the taxes out of her own account, still ran it as hers in every way that counted. The deed had never once felt like a thing I owned. It was just Nana's quiet paperwork, the kind I filed and forgot. Right up until the morning 6 weeks ago when the house stopped being hers and nobody had stopped to wonder whose it became. Wade had signed a contract to sell a house that had never, for one single day, belonged to him. He did not own a board of it. He could no more sell that house than he could sell the county courthouse. I sat back in my chair and let that settle. Wade signed as the owner of a house he had never owned. People do reckless things when their mother tells them to, but there is reckless, and then there is signing your name as the seller of property you do not hold title to, in writing, for money, in front of a title company that is going to check. The smile on Marlene's face on that porch, the one that said we have already won, I understood it now. They thought they were holding the deed. They were holding nothing. And in my purse, still sealed, my grandmother was waiting to tell me she had known this day would come. I remembered the day she did it, once I made myself look back. It was the same year I had quietly co-signed Tara's first business loan and watched it fold without a word of thanks, paying down the last of it myself so no one would have to know. I think now that Nana had seen me do it, seen the whole pattern of who paid for this family and who got thanked, and decided she had watched enough. 14 years ago, Nana had asked me to drive her to the courthouse on a Thursday morning. She said she had some paperwork to tidy up, and I assumed it was about her own affairs, taxes, or the truck, or one of the leases on her land. We waited in a beige hallway and she filled out a form in her careful slanted print, and afterward she took me to the diner and bought me a slice of pie I didn't ask for. "I want you to have the house," she said, over the pie. I told her she was being morbid, that she'd outlive us all, and she just looked at me with those pale, steady eyes and said, "This is not about dying, Claire. This is about having somewhere to stand." I thought she meant something sweet and grandmotherly. I thanked her and ate my pie and never thought about it again, because at the time my marriage was fine, or I believed it was, and the idea that I would ever need somewhere of my own to stand seemed like an old woman's worry. She let me believe that. She did not explain. She had already watched Marlene work on Wade for years, watched the way his spine went soft whenever his mother walked into a room, and she made her move quietly and let me keep my comfortable ignorance for as long as it would last. 14 years. She bought me 14 years of not having to know, and then she made sure that on the day I finally needed it, the floor under me would be mine. I reached into my purse for the envelope. It was time. I opened it at my desk, alone, like she'd asked. It was 3 pages, both sides, that slanted hand getting a little shakier toward the end. "My dear Claire," it began. "If Joan has given you this, then I am gone, and I am sorry I am not there to make you a cup of tea while you read it. I am going to tell you some things I never said out loud, because saying them would have hurt you while there was still hope, and I am a coward about your feelings the way you are a coward about your own. I have watched that man let his mother run your life for 20 years. I have watched you pay and call it love. I did not raise you to be a bank with a heartbeat." She wrote that she had seen it early, the way Marlene measured everything I owned, the way Wade went quiet and useless whenever it mattered. She wrote that she had not trusted them with so much as a casserole dish, let alone a house. And then, she wrote the line that I have since had framed and hung in my kitchen where I see it every morning. "Keep the deed in your name, Claire. Always." She said she had put the house in my name alone, years ago, precisely so that no one could ever stand on my porch and tell me I had nowhere to go. She said the rest, the money, the Aspen place, was tied up in a trust so tight that no husband, no mother-in-law, no clever lawyer they hired could pry a dollar of it loose from me. She had built me a fortress while I was busy handing out the keys to my own life. I sat in that empty office and I did not cry. Not yet. I read it again. Then I turned to the second page, because she was not finished telling me what to do. The second page was instructions, because of course it was. "My grandmother never gave you a feeling without giving you a task to do with it. Do not put a cent of that money in a joint account," she wrote, underlined. "Do not pay their bills with it. Keep it separate and keep it clean, and it stays yours no matter what they file or say." She had clearly talked to a lawyer of her own. She knew that the second I mixed her gift with our marriage, the law might start calling it ours, and she was not about to let me undo her 14 years of quiet work in a single soft-hearted afternoon. Then, at the very bottom, smaller, like an afterthought she wanted to look casual, she wrote the part that actually undid me. "You will want to be kind, Claire. You always do. But there is a difference between being kind and being a doormat. And the difference is that a kind woman keeps her door. Do not spend the rest of your good years buying respect from people who were never going to give it to you. Choose your peace. It is allowed." I sat there a long time. I had spent 27 years thinking that if I just gave enough, eventually I would be loved the way I was loving. My grandmother had known the truth before I did, and she had built me a way out and trusted me to find it. The grief and the anger and the cold clarity all arrived at once, and then they sorted themselves. the way they do for me, into a list. I knew exactly what I was going to do. And for the first time in weeks, my hands were perfectly still. I want to pause for just a second. My grandmother spent her whole life being told to be grateful for whatever she was handed, and she refused. She read the paperwork instead. If there is one woman in your life who taught you to keep something in your own name, to keep your own door, then take a breath and go thank her, or remember her. Then come back, because this is the part where it turns. I called Joan that night, and she came back to the office in her gardening clothes with reading glasses pushed up in her hair. I laid it all out on the conference table like a case, because it was one. The deed in my name only. The trust. The listing. Wade's signature on a contract to sell property he didn't own. Joan put on her glasses and read every page without saying a word, which is how I knew it was bad for them and good for me. When she finished, she took the glasses off and looked at me. "Claire," she said, "in Colorado, a house your grandmother deeded to you alone is your separate property. It is not marital. He has no claim on it, and more to the point, he has no title to it, which means he never had the legal right to list it or sell it. The contract rests on a claim that simply isn't true. No title company on earth is going to close on a sale where the seller isn't the owner of record." "The formal title search hasn't even been run yet," Joan said, "because agents take a seller's word at listing, and the title company only digs in once the deal is in escrow, usually the week of closing. That search was set for Thursday. It would have detonated on its own. You're just lighting the fuse a few days early." I asked her about the $40,000 the Deckers had put down. "That," she said, "is where it stops being just embarrassing for Wade and starts being a real problem, because taking a stranger's money for a house you had no right to sell is the kind of thing that opens a person up to serious legal exposure, the kind that follows people around." She told me the inheritance was airtight too, sitting in the trust exactly the way Nana set it up, nothing commingled, nothing exposed. I had every card. Now I had to decide how I wanted to play them. Joan asked me what I wanted. I told her I needed to think about that overnight, because I only wanted to do this once. Marlene did not give me the night. She showed up at the office the next morning at 9 sharp, in her good coat, and sat down across from me like a woman conducting a negotiation she had already won. She had clearly decided that my silence on the porch had been weakness, and that all she needed to do was apply a little more pressure to finish the job. She started gentle, which is how she always starts. She said she knew this was hard, that endings always are, but that I should think about being practical. Then she made me an offer. She would see to it that I got $15,000 to help me get settled somewhere, out of the goodness of their hearts, if I would just sign the papers and let the sale close clean and not make a scene. $15,000 for my grandmother's house. She said it the way you'd offer a child money to leave a party quietly. When I didn't jump at it, the gentleness fell off her like a coat she was done wearing, and she leaned in. "Everyone in this town already knows you couldn't keep a husband," she said. "Don't make them watch you fight over a house too." There it was, the thing she actually believed, that my whole worth was in keeping Wade, and that I should be ashamed enough to disappear. I looked at her for a moment. I thought about Marlene on a curb all those years ago, watching strangers carry out her furniture, and I felt something almost like pity, and then I let it go, because pity is a door, and I was keeping mine. I told her, very calmly, that I would have an answer for everyone by the end of the week. She smiled, satisfied, certain she had rattled me. She had no idea I had just scheduled her own undoing. That night I sat in my kitchen, in my grandmother's house, and I decided how this would end. I could have simply walked away. The deed was mine. The trust was mine. The sale was already dead on arrival the second a title officer looked at it. I could have let it collapse quietly, kept my peace the way Nana told me to, and never raised my voice. For about an hour, that is what I planned to do. Then I thought about the Deckers. That couple from Glenwood with $40,000 in escrow and a moving truck on hold, who had done nothing wrong except trust a man who signed a paper. I thought about Dot Hensley and the whole street that had watched me get served on my own steps and would happily go on believing whatever Marlene told them. And I thought about the difference my grandmother drew between being kind and being a doormat, and how the difference was a door. I was not going to scream. I was not going to plot some cruel trap. I was simply going to do, out loud and on the record, exactly what the truth required, and I was going to do it where the same people who watched my humiliation could watch the truth, set it right. They had used a porch and an audience to shame me. I would use documents and that same audience to end it. My weapon was never going to be their weapon. They dealt in noise and pressure and the story they told the neighbors. I deal in what is written down and recorded and true. I picked up my legal pad and started a list of who needed to be in one place, at one time, holding the right pieces of paper. The next morning, I did the boring, devastating work that real consequences are made of. I did not call Wade. I did not call Marlene. I called the title company handling the Decker sale, identified myself as the sole owner of record, and told their closing officer politely that the person who had signed the listing as seller held no interest in the property. I gave her the recording number for my deed so she could pull it herself. There was a long pause on the line, the particular pause of a professional realizing a transaction is about to detonate. She thanked me, a little faintly, and said she would need to halt everything and notify the parties. Then I had Joan record a notice on the property, a simple document that tells the whole world the title is mine and disputed sales need not apply. It took 15 minutes and a recording fee of $43. That is the part nobody tells you about justice. It is not loud. It does not come with music. It comes with a closing officer's polite pause and a $43 fee and a clerk stamping a date. But the moment that stamp came down, the entire machine Marlene had built started grinding to a stop in places she couldn't see and couldn't fix. The listing agent would get a call. The escrow would freeze. The Deckers would learn the truth from a stranger. And none of those people had any reason to protect Wade, because none of them were his mother. I had not raised my voice once. I had simply turned on the lights in a room where 3 people had been working in the dark, and now everyone could see what was actually on the table. It was Tara who had pushed the timing, I learned, and once I understood why, the whole ugly clock made sense. Tara was drowning. Her business had closed 2 years before, owing more than it ever earned, and she had quietly taken a second mortgage on her own house to stay afloat, and that mortgage was now eating her alive. She needed cash, real cash, and she needed it before the bank moved on her. She was the one who looked at my grandmother's death and saw not a loss, but a deadline. She was the one who told Wade and Marlene that the smart play was to move fast, sell the Marrow Creek house, split the proceeds, and force a quick divorce settlement before the estate locked down. She did the math out loud at a kitchen table I wasn't sitting at, and decided that my homelessness was an acceptable line item in solving her own. I do not feel sorry for her. I want to be clear about that, because I know the kind woman I was supposed to be would find a way to. A person who is drowning can call for help. They can sell their own things. They can humble themselves and ask. What they are not allowed to do is shove someone else under the water to climb up on. Tara made a choice. She chose to plan my eviction over banana bread to save herself a phone call to a bankruptcy attorney. The water she was so afraid of was about to close over her head anyway, and now it would do it in front of everyone. I did not pull her under. She did that herself, the day she decided I was disposable. Wade came to see me alone, which was the bravest thing he did in the whole affair, and even that he did badly. He found me at the office at the end of the day and stood in the doorway like a man who wasn't sure he was allowed in. Which, in my office, he wasn't. He couldn't look at me. He looked at the carpet, at the window, at his own hands. He said my name twice, and then he said he hadn't thought it would go this far. That was his great confession. Not I'm sorry. Not I was wrong. Not I should have stood up for you once in 27 years. Just I didn't think it would go this far. as if the whole thing had been weather that happened to him, as if his own signature on that contract had been forged by a stranger. I looked at him for a long moment and I saw, finally and completely, the man I had spent half my life carrying. Not a villain. Marlene was the will and Tara was the engine, but Wade was the soft, agreeable nothing in the middle who would sign whatever was put in front of him by whoever was standing closest. He had never chosen me. He had simply failed to choose against me until the day his mother handed him a pen. I did not yell. I told him quietly that he had signed a contract to sell a house he did not own, and that he should probably talk to a lawyer of his own, and soon. His face did something complicated. He had come for absolution, or maybe just for me to make it easier the way I always had. I let him stand there in the doorway and find out that the thermostat was finally off. For 27 years, I mistook a man who couldn't say no to his mother for a man who would stand beside me. If you are still telling yourself that someone will finally choose you on the day it actually costs them something, watch what Wade does when we all end up back on that porch. Then ask yourself the harder question about your own life and subscribe, because I want you here when it lands. The Deckers found out the way everyone eventually finds out, from a phone call they weren't expecting. Their closing officer told them the sale could not proceed because the seller did not hold title, and that the actual owner of record had recorded a notice. I am told Mr. Decker was quiet for a moment, and then very much not quiet. They had sold their own place to buy ours. They had a daughter starting at the Marrow Creek School in the fall. They had measured rooms and picked paint, all on the strength of a contract Wade had no right to sign. When the agent couldn't give them answers, they got a lawyer of their own, and that lawyer did exactly what I would have done, which was send a sharply worded letter to the people who had taken the $40,000 asking, in formal language, how they intended to make this right. Suddenly, Marlene's clean, fast sale had a furious buyer, a nervous listing agent, a title company backing away with both hands up, and an attorney asking pointed questions about whether anyone had committed fraud. The pressure she had aimed at me had nowhere to go but back onto her own family. I did not have to do a single cruel thing. I had simply told the truth to the right office, and the truth had gone out and found everyone who needed to hear it. The Deckers were never my enemies. They were a family who got hurt by the same people who tried to hurt me, and the kindest thing I could do for them was make sure the floor they thought they'd bought was real, which meant making sure everyone understood it had never been Wade's to sell. By Wednesday, it was official, in the flat, unarguable way that only paperwork can be official. The title company issued its determination, copied to every party, and the language was plain enough that even Marlene couldn't reshape it into a truth she preferred. The seller of record was Claire Whitfield. The individual who executed the listing and purchase agreement, Wade Hollis, held no recorded interest in the property and was not authorized to convey it. The transaction could not close. Escrow would be unwound and the Deckers' funds returned. I read it twice, the way I read everything, and then I set it down and felt the quiet I had been waiting for. Marlene called the office 4 times that afternoon. I let it go to voicemail 4 times. She had no move left. She could not pressure a title company into pretending Wade owned a house he didn't. She could not shame a recorded deed into changing its mind. The whole strategy had depended on me being too scared, too soft, and too quick to keep the peace to ever check the floor I was standing on, and the strategy had run headfirst into the one thing my grandmother gave me that they never thought to ask about. There was only one act left to play, and it had to happen at the house, because they had set the closing walkthrough for Friday afternoon, and as far as the agent and the Deckers knew, they were all still meeting at the property. Marlene didn't know the sale was already dead. Wade hadn't told her. He was too much of a coward, and I, God help me, decided not to either. I wanted everyone in the same place when the truth finally stood up. So on Friday afternoon, everyone came to the porch. The Deckers came because no one had clearly told them to stay home, and because they wanted answers in person. Their agent came, pale and over-apologizing. Marlene came in her good coat, certain this was the victory lap, the day she'd hand over keys and pocket the proceeds. Tara came, twitchy. already spending money that did not exist. Wade came because his mother told him to, and stood off to the side like a man waiting outside a principal's office. And I came last, on purpose, walking up my own path past Dot Hensley, who had once again found urgent business with her geraniums. I carried one thing, a plain manila folder, the kind I hand clients across my desk every day of my life. Inside, it was the deed, the trust summary, the recorded notice, and the title company's determination in that order, because order is the thing I am good at. I climbed my own crooked steps, the same steps where a stranger had handed me divorce papers 11 days before, and I turned around to face all of them from the top, which is exactly where Marlene had been standing when she told the whole street I was homeless. The afternoon was bright and cold and very quiet. Even Dot's hose was off. I looked down at the people who had planned to throw me out of my grandmother's house, and at the innocent family they had nearly ruined to do it, and I opened the folder. I want to tell you, I felt triumphant. Mostly I felt my grandmother's hand on my shoulder, steady and patient, the way it had been in a beige courthouse hallway 14 years before. Marlene started talking before I could, because Marlene always starts talking. She turned to the Deckers and the agent with that bright, managing smile and said how glad she was everyone could be here, that it had been a difficult situation with an emotional family member, glancing at me, but that they would have the keys today and everything would be settled. She actually gestured at me like a hostess presenting an awkward relative. The Deckers looked confused. The agent looked sick. Wade looked at the floorboards. And I just stood at the top of my own steps and let her finish, because I have learned that the more confident someone is in a false thing, the more devastating it is to let them say all of it first. She told the Deckers not to worry about the little hiccup with the paperwork. She said it was all a misunderstanding that the lawyers would clear up by Monday. She said the word lawyers like a woman who had never once read what a lawyer actually does. Then she turned to me, and with the whole audience watching, she reached for her best line again, the one that had worked so well the first time, the one she thought was the period at the end of my whole life. She said it slow and clear so the Deckers would understand who was in charge here. The house is sold. You're homeless now. And this time, instead of a neighbor with a hose, she had an audience of the very people whose lives depended on whether that sentence was true. It was the worst possible room in which to say something false. I let it hang in the cold air for one full second. Then I opened my folder. Nobody moved. The Deckers were staring at Marlene and then at me, trying to read which of us was the crazy one, because in any standoff between two calm women and one frantic one, the audience always wants to know who to believe. I made it easy for them. I did not raise my voice. I did not even look at Marlene yet. I looked at the Deckers, because they were the ones who deserved the truth first, and I said, very gently, that I was so sorry, and that I needed to show them something before they spent one more dollar or one more sleepless night on this house. Marlene's smile faltered. "What are you doing?" she said, the managing tone cracking down the middle. Tara took a half step forward and then stopped, because some animal part of her had finally sensed the floor shifting. Wade went very still. I took the first page out of the folder and held it up so the afternoon light caught it. The recorded deed, the county stamp clear as a bell. I told the Deckers that this was the deed to the property they believed they were buying. I told them to look at the name of the owner. I told them to look at the date. And then I said the thing I had driven 15 quiet minutes to be sure of, the thing my grandmother had spent 14 years making true, the thing that turned Marlene's whole bright, confident world inside out in the space of a single sentence. The man who signed your contract has never owned 1 inch of this house. The agent made a small sound. The Deckers' faces changed. And Marlene's mouth opened. And for the first time in the 27 years I had known her, nothing came out. I laid the pages out one by one along the porch railing, in order, the way I lay evidence in front of a judge, and I narrated each one in the calm, even voice I use when I want people to understand that I am not guessing. "This is the deed," I said, "recorded 14 years ago. The owner is Claire Whitfield. Only Claire Whitfield. My grandmother signed this house over to me alone, long before any of this, and a house deeded to one spouse by a family member is that spouse's separate property under Colorado law. It is not marital. It was never his to divide, and it was never, for one single day, his to sell. This, I said, sliding the next page forward, is the recorded notice I filed Tuesday, telling the world the title is mine, and this is the title company's determination, issued Wednesday, stating in writing that Wade Hollis held no interest in this property and had no authority to convey it, and that the sale cannot close. The Deckers' money is already being returned. I said it all without heat, because I did not need heat. The papers were doing the burning for me. Then I looked at Marlene, finally, and I gave her the only line I had saved for her, the one I had carried up those steps. You can't sell a house that was never yours. That was when she exploded. The patient managing mask came all the way off and she started shouting that I was a liar, that I was a thief stealing the family's home, that her son had every right, that I had always thought I was better than them. Spit at the corners of her mouth. 40 years of swallowed panic about a curb and a suitcase came pouring out at me on my own porch, loud enough that Dot Hensley didn't even pretend to water anymore. And I just stood there, quiet, and let her be the only person making noise. Because that is the whole secret of it. That is the power my grandmother understood. The calm one wins. Tara was already backing toward her truck, doing the math on how exposed she suddenly was. Mr. Decker had stepped between his wife and the shouting and was on the phone with their lawyer. And Wade, my husband of 27 years, the soft, agreeable nothing in the middle, stood 3 feet from his screaming mother and 3 feet from me, and chose, as he had chosen his entire life, to do absolutely nothing. He didn't defend me. He didn't even defend himself. He just watched his mother shout at the woman who used to make his coffee with 2 sugars. And I understood, fully and finally and without any pain at all, that there had never been anything there to save. The Deckers left within the hour, their $40,000 on its way back to them, their lawyer already drafting a demand to the people who had taken it. They found a different house that summer, a better one, and the daughter started school in the fall just fine. The listing agent reported the whole thing to her broker before it could land on her. And even the suspicion of fraud, once it attaches to a man who signed as the owner of a house he never owned, does not wash off in a small town in a single season. Marlene shouted until she ran out of air, and then she got in her gray sedan and drove away from the house she had been so sure was hers, exactly the way she'd once watched the bank drive her out of her own. Tara went home to a second mortgage no one was going to rescue her from. And Wade, who came for keys, left with nothing in his hands, because there had never been anything in them to begin with. When the cars were gone, I gathered my pages back into their folder, in order. Then I did the simplest thing in this whole story, the thing the entire 11 days had been quietly building toward. I turned around, climbed the last 2 crooked steps, opened my own front door with my own key, and walked into my grandmother's house. The one she put in my name 14 years before any of them thought to want it. I left them all out on the porch, the screaming and the schemes, and the man I used to be married to. And I shut the door behind me, gently, because I did not need to slam it. The house was quiet and smelled like her, like cedar and old paper. I stood in the front hall where she used to hang her coat. I was not homeless. I had, it turned out, been the only one of them with somewhere to stand the entire time. The divorce went through, because I let it. I had no interest in keeping a marriage that had only ever been a long employment contract I didn't know I'd signed. But it went through on my terms, in the daylight, with every asset exactly where it belonged. The house stayed mine, because it always had been. The trust stayed sealed and separate and clean, just as Nana built it, $7 million and an Aspen estate that no lawyer Marlene could afford would ever pry loose. Wade got the divorce he asked for and the legal mess he didn't, and he moved into his mother's house, which I find is the most fitting ending a story could give him. Tara lost her own home that winter to the bank she'd been running from. the exact fate she had tried to hand me to save herself. Marlene never apologized, never wavered, never once admitted the deed said what it said. She just stopped telling the curb story at holidays because she no longer had an audience that didn't know how it really ended. As for me, I sold the Aspen estate because I did not need a mansion, and I put the money to work the way my grandmother would have wanted. Quietly. I kept her house in Marrow Creek with its crooked steps and wide porch. I had the steps fixed, finally, by a contractor I paid in full and never had to chase. And I hung her letter in a frame on the kitchen wall, the second page, the part about kindness and doormats and doors, where I could read it with my morning coffee. 1 sugar now. I stopped making it the way Wade liked it the morning the locks were changed. People in town ask me sometimes if I'm angry, if I lie awake hating them. I don't. Hating them would mean leaving the door open just a crack, in case they ever wanted back in to earn it. My door is closed, and a closed door is not an act of anger. It is an act of peace. I see Dot Hensley over the fence and we talk about her geraniums, and she has, in her way, become the witness who corrected the story for the whole street. I work at the firm still, putting other people's worst weeks in order, and now and then a woman sits down across my desk who reminds me of who I was 11 days before that porch, and I tell her one thing before anything else. Go check whose name is on the deed. I am not the family thermostat anymore. I am a woman with a house, a quiet bank account, and a morning I get to decide for myself. It is not a loud life. My grandmother taught me that the good ones rarely are. My grandmother never told me to be grateful for crumbs. She told me to keep my name on the things that mattered and to walk toward my own peace instead of bargaining, year after year, for a respect that was never once going to come. That's my story. A porch, a process server, and a deed 3 people never thought to read. If it reminded you to check whose name is on the things you have earned, do it this week, not someday. And if you know a woman who keeps giving and giving until there's nothing left for her, share this with her. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.